The phone rang just as the afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of my small California living room. I wasn't expecting anyone and rarely received calls, so when I answered it, I didn't anticipate the words that would shatter the fragile peace I had spent years cultivating. "Mom, we've made a decision." My daughter's voice trembled on the other end, though I could barely recognize it as hers. "The family. They don't want you involved anymore. We've all agreed it's best if you're not part of our lives moving forward." I sat down slowly, the receiver trembling in my hand. My mind scrambled to grasp the meaning behind her words. "What do you mean, not part of your lives?" I whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it less real. "It's final, Mom," she said, voice firm but cold. "They don't want to have to deal with you anymore." "I'm sorry." Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving me alone with the sudden, crushing silence. I stared at the receiver, numb. After all these years of sacrifice, of being the pillar for my children after their father walked away, I was being cast aside like an inconvenient afterthought. The woman who had dedicated her life to raising her family, who had stood alone through storms and heartbreak, was now being told she was no longer welcome. I sank into my worn armchair, my mind replaying every memory, every moment I had given to my children. The sleepless nights nursing sick babies, the long hours working 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, the holidays spent making sure no one went without. All of it seemed, had been erased in a single phone call. I thought about my daughter's voice, strained and distant, and the way she said, "We've made a decision," as if I were some problem to be solved rather than the mother who had loved her fiercely. The family, my family, had decided I was no longer part of them. The word "estranged" suddenly felt like a label branded deep into my skin. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall freely for the first time in years. There was a hollow ache inside me, a loneliness that wrapped around my heart like a cold fog. I had always believed that no matter what happened, my children would stand by me. But now I was left wondering what had driven such a wedge between us. The house felt unbearably quiet after the call. The ticking of the clock on the wall echoed like a countdown to a future where I was invisible. I reached out and picked up an old photograph from the side table, a faded image of my children as toddlers, their faces bright with innocence and trust. I traced their smiles with a trembling finger, desperate for a glimpse of the family I once knew. How had we come to this? I asked myself, the question spinning in my mind like a relentless storm. I wasn't a perfect mother, but I had always tried to be present, to love and protect my children as best I could. When their father left, I had stepped into the void without hesitation, determined to shield them from pain. I had worked tirelessly, often sacrificing my own happiness and health, so they would never feel the absence of a father. Yet somehow that sacrifice had been overlooked or worse, dismissed. I remembered the last family gathering months ago, when tensions had simmered beneath polite conversation. There had been subtle glances and whispered comments, hints of resentment I hadn't fully understood at the time. I had brushed them aside, telling myself it was just the stress of daily life, or perhaps misunderstandings that could be smoothed over with time. But now those small cracks had ruptured into a chasm I wasn't sure could be bridged. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself drifting through the empty rooms of my home, each corner holding a memory of better days. The kitchen where I had prepared countless meals, the living room where we had shared laughter and tears, the staircase my children had raced up and down in their youth, all seemed to mourn alongside me. Despite the weight of despair pressing down, a flicker of resolve began to kindle inside me. I was not going to let this be the end of our story. If my family had turned their backs on me, I would find a way to understand why. I owed it to myself and to them to seek the truth behind this sudden rejection. I moved toward the small desk by the window, where I kept letters and photographs collected over the years. Maybe buried among these keepsakes I could find a clue. Something that explained the growing distance, the silence, the coldness that had crept into our relationships like an unwelcome shadow. As I sorted through the faded envelopes and creased photographs, I thought about the life I had built here in California. It was modest, but it was mine. A place filled with memories of love, struggle, and resilience. I had always believed that family was the foundation of everything, that no matter the hardships, love would prevail. But now I was forced to confront a painful truth. Sometimes, family can fracture, and love can be tested in ways we never expect. I took a deep breath and steadied my hands. I would not let despair consume me. Instead, I would gather the pieces of our broken family story and try to put them back together. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to heal the wounds and reclaim the bonds that had been severed. For now, though, the sting of rejection was fresh and raw. The world I had known had shifted beneath my feet, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. But beneath the sorrow, a quiet determination began to grow. I owed it to myself to fight for my place in this family, even if they no longer recognized me as one of their own. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a soft shade of pink, I sat by the window, clutching the photograph of my children close to my heart. The tears came again, but this time they were mixed with something else. A fragile hope that this heartbreaking moment could be the beginning of a new chapter. A chance to uncover the truth and perhaps find my way back home. The days that followed were a blur of quiet reflection and aching solitude. I found myself sinking deeper into the memories that had shaped my life, each one a thread in the tapestry of the family I had fought so hard to hold together. The house, once filled with the lively chatter of children and the comforting hum of daily routines, now felt like a hollow shell echoing with absence. I sat by the window for hours at a time, watching the world outside move on without me, while inside, the weight of loneliness pressed heavily on my chest. I had never imagined I would feel so utterly abandoned by the very people I had given everything to. It was a loneliness unlike any other, the kind that gnaws at your soul, whispering doubts and regrets in the quiet moments. As I traced the lines of my children's faces in old photographs, I was transported back to the early days of motherhood. Those were times of joy and exhaustion intertwined, of learning to navigate sleepless nights and first steps, of watching tiny fingers curl around my own with complete trust. Back then, their laughter was the music that carried me through the darkest days. Their father had left when they were still very young. I remember the shock and despair that followed. How the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet as I faced the daunting task of raising 3 children alone. But I had no choice. I rolled up my sleeves and embraced the challenge, determined to be both mother and father, provider and protector. I worked long hours in a small bakery, often returning home with aching feet and tired hands, yet always making sure the house was warm and dinner was on the table. I sacrificed my own dreams, putting aside college courses I had once hoped to complete, shelving personal ambitions, to ensure my children never felt the void left by their father. I believed that my love and presence would be enough to fill any gaps, that my dedication would shield them from pain. But somewhere along the way the distance grew. It was subtle at first, a missed phone call here, a cancelled visit there. Then came the guarded conversations, the hesitation in their voices, and eventually, the coldness that felt like a wall rising between us. I tried to reach out to bridge the growing divide, but my efforts often met with silence or indifference. The inheritance dispute had been the breaking point. What began as a simple conversation about family heirlooms and savings spiraled into accusations and bitterness. I was accused of withholding information, of making decisions without consulting them. The trust one thought we shared crumbled, replaced by suspicion and resentment. I replayed those moments over and over, searching for where I had gone wrong. Was it my stubbornness? My tendency to hold on too tightly? Or had years of unspoken grievances finally erupted into a chasm too wide to cross? Each night I lay awake, haunted by the thought that I might have failed my children, not in the way I had feared when they were young, but now in the most profound way of all, failing to keep our family together. The pain was compounded by the silence that followed. No calls to check on me, no visits to see if I was all right. The holidays passed without word or invitation. I was left to face the emptiness alone, a ghost in the lives of those I loved most. Despite the ache, I refused to let despair consume me. I reminded myself that love, even when tested, can endure. I clung to the hope that beneath the hurt and anger, my children still carried the memory of the mother who had been their constant through every storm. I thought of my daughter's voice on the phone, the tremor that betrayed her own pain, and wondered if she too felt the weight of what had been lost. Perhaps they were struggling with their own fears and misunderstandings, tangled in emotions too complex to express. Determined to make sense of the growing distance, I began to write. Letters poured from my heart onto paper, words I could never find the courage to say aloud. I wrote of my love, my regrets, my memories. I sent them in the hope that they might reach my children's hearts, even if their doors were closed to me. But many of those letters went unanswered, left unopened or discarded without a word. Each silence felt like another wound, deepening the sense of isolation. In the quiet moments between sorrow and hope, I found myself reflecting on the years that had shaped us all. The sacrifices made, the dreams deferred, the misunderstandings that had festered in the shadows. I remembered the small victories. The first day of school, the graduations, the birthdays celebrated with laughter and cake. Those moments had been my lifeline, reminders that despite hardships, we had built a family rooted in love. Yet I also acknowledged the fractures, the unspoken resentments, the words left unsaid, the emotional distance that grew like a slow poison. I realized that my children's rejection was not just about me. It was a reflection of the complex, tangled web of our shared history, pain and hope intertwined, deserving of understanding and compassion. As I sat one evening surrounded by the photographs and mementos that held pieces of our story, I felt a profound sadness but also a spark of determination. I would not let the silence define us. I would keep searching for a way back into their lives, for a path to heal the wounds that threatened to tear us apart. The road ahead was uncertain, and the pain was raw, but I carried with me the knowledge that love, even when challenged, can find its way through the darkest of times. And so, amid the loneliness and heartache, I held on to the fragile hope that one day, my children would see the truth of my love and the sacrifices I had made, not as burdens or mistakes, but as the foundation of the family we once were and could be again. In the weeks that followed, I found myself sinking into the quiet solitude of my California home, surrounded by the echoes of a family fractured and distant. The silence was heavy, but it also gave me space, a rare gift, to sift through the past, to search for answers hidden beneath years of pain and misunderstanding. One afternoon I sat at my small wooden desk, a pile of old letters and photographs spread before me like scattered fragments of a life once whole. The worn envelopes carried faded postmarks, some in my own handwriting, others from friends and family long since lost to time. As I opened each one, I was transported back to moments I had almost forgotten. The laughter, the tears, the simple joys and quiet sorrows that had woven the fabric of our family. But amidst these touching memories, I began to uncover shadows I had not seen before. Letters between my children hinted at tensions I had been blind to, conversations filled with frustration and resentment that had never reached my ears. There were references to money troubles, whispered accusations, and a growing sense of betrayal that gnawed at the edges of our relationships. I unfolded a crumpled note from my eldest son, his handwriting shaky but urgent. He spoke of feeling overlooked, unheard, and burdened by expectations he could not meet. Another letter from my daughter hinted at financial decisions made without her knowledge, a source of deep hurt that had festered in silence. These words, once hidden beneath layers of pride and silence, now lay bare on the table before me. The realization struck me like a cold wind. My family's rejection was not born solely from anger or misunderstanding. It was tangled with secrets and wounds I had been unaware of. There were betrayals I had never imagined, and mistakes made on all sides, creating a web of hurt that had ensnared us all. I sifted through bank statements and legal papers I had tucked away, hoping to find clarity. There, amidst the numbers and figures, I uncovered discrepancies, financial mismanagement that explained much of the tension and mistrust, bills left unpaid, investments made without consent, money borrowed and never returned. It was a mess, a labyrinth of complications that had been hidden beneath the surface of polite smiles and family gatherings. As I pieced together the puzzle, I began to understand how easily misunderstandings could grow into deep wounds. What I had thought was mere distance was, in truth, a chasm carved by unspoken grievances and concealed truths. But even more alarming was the discovery of outside influences, people who had inserted themselves into our family affairs, stirring discord for their own gain. Letters hinted at manipulations, whispered promises and veiled threats. It became clear that the fractures within my family were not just the product of internal strife, but had been exacerbated by those who saw opportunity in our pain. This new knowledge both shocked and galvanized me. I realized that if I wanted to salvage what remained of my family, I needed to confront these hidden forces and bring the truth to light. I could no longer accept the silence or the blame placed solely on my shoulders. It was time to face the shadows that had lurked in the corners of our lives and demand accountability. With trembling hands but a steady heart, I began preparing to reach out, not just to my children, but to the extended family and friends who had witnessed the unraveling of our bonds. I collected copies of letters, bank statements, and photographs, assembling a record of the events that had led us to this painful crossroads. Each piece of evidence was a challenge to the narratives that had been spun in my absence, a testament to the complexity of our story. I knew that confronting these truths would be difficult, that it might stir anger and resistance. But I also knew that without honesty, there could be no healing. One afternoon I found myself drafting a letter addressed to the entire family, a plea for a meeting, a chance to confront our misunderstandings openly and honestly. I wrote of my love and regret, of my desire to understand and to be understood. I acknowledged my own faults and asked for forgiveness, but I also asked for the chance to tell my side of the story without judgment. When I finally sent the letter, my hands shook with a mix of fear and hope. I had no idea how it would be received, but I knew I could no longer remain silent. Days later, a response arrived from my son. His words were cautious but open, agreeing to a meeting. It was a small victory, a crack in the wall that had separated us. The day of the reunion arrived with a tension that filled the air like static electricity. I stood at the door of my childhood home, the place where so many memories had been made and broken, waiting for my family to arrive. As they walked through the door, I saw in their eyes the same mixture of hurt and hope that I felt. The conversation that followed was raw and painful. Accusations were laid bare, tears were shed, and long-held resentments were voiced. But amid the storm of emotions, there was also honesty, an opening for understanding that had been missing for too long. I spoke of the sacrifices I had made, of the love that had never wavered, and of the pain I had carried in silence. I shared the evidence I had uncovered, not to accuse, but to reveal the truths that had shaped our fractured family. I asked them to see me not as an adversary, but as the mother who had always wanted nothing more than to keep us united. Slowly, the walls began to crumble. My children listened, some with tears in their eyes, others with the guarded expressions of those who have long been hurt, but still yearn for connection. It was not an easy conversation, and it would not erase the past, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild on the foundations of honesty and forgiveness. When the meeting ended, I felt a flicker of hope stirring in my heart. For the first time in months, I saw the possibility of healing, of reclaiming the love that had been overshadowed by pain. As I closed the door behind them that evening, I knew the journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But armed with truth and courage, I was ready to face whatever came next, determined to restore the family I had fought so hard to protect. The air was thick with tension as I stood before my family in the old living room, the place where so many memories had been forged and fractured. Faces I had loved and lost to silence now looked at me with a mix of suspicion, pain, and beneath it all, a faint glimmer of hope. This was the moment I had feared and longed for, the confrontation that could either break us forever or begin the slow process of healing. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice as I began to speak. I know there's been a lot of hurt between us, I said, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. Some of it caused by things I didn't see, and some by things you've carried in silence. But I want to tell you my truth, the story behind the pain, the sacrifices, the mistakes. Not to blame, but to be understood. The room fell silent. My son's jaw tightened, my daughter's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and my youngest child shifted uncomfortably in their seat. I could feel the weight of years pressing down on us all. I raised you alone when your father left, I continued, my voice catching slightly. I worked every hour I could find so you wouldn't feel the absence, so you could have a childhood filled with love and security. I gave up my own dreams for you. But I was not perfect. I made decisions, some good, some bad. I never meant to hurt any of you. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then I unfolded the folder I had brought, filled with letters, bank statements, and photographs that told a story no one had dared to speak aloud. There are things I didn't know at the time. Financial decisions made without our knowledge, outside influences that twisted our family dynamics. I've gathered this evidence not to point fingers, but because we need to see the whole picture if we are to move forward. My daughter's voice trembled as she spoke next. Mom, we felt shut out. You never told us what was going on. We thought you were hiding things, and that made us angry and hurt." Her words stung, but I nodded in understanding. "I'm sorry for that. I never meant to exclude you. I was trying to protect you, but I see now that it only made things worse." The conversation grew more intense as each family member shared their feelings: hurt, betrayal, confusion, all tangled together in a painful web. But amid the raw emotions there was honesty. Walls that had stood for years began to crumble, revealing the vulnerable hearts beneath. At one point, my eldest son's voice broke through the tension. "Mom, I didn't realize how much you sacrificed. I was so focused on my own pain that I didn't see yours." Tears welled in my eyes. "We've all been hurting," I said softly. "But if we want to heal, we have to face the truth together." The hours passed like minutes as we talked, sometimes shouting, sometimes crying, but always listening. It was the hardest conversation I had ever been part of, but also the most necessary. When the evening drew to a close, there was a fragile peace in the room. A tentative truce born from shared pain and a desire to rebuild what had been broken. As they left that night, I stood in the doorway, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The confrontation had been painful, but it had opened a door. For the first time in a long while, I felt the possibility of reconciliation. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. Forgiveness is not instant, and trust takes time to rebuild. But this confrontation was the turning point. The moment when our family began to reclaim its story, not as victims of circumstance, but as survivors united by love and resilience. Later, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I reflected on the courage it had taken to face my family with honesty and openness. I realized that reclaiming my dignity and voice was not just about proving my side, but about embracing the messy, imperfect truth of our lives. I felt a renewed strength within me, a determination to keep fighting for my family, to nurture the fragile bonds that remained, and to never let silence or fear keep us apart again. This confrontation was only the beginning, but it was a powerful step toward healing, and it gave me hope that one day, the wounds could mend, and the love that had always been there could shine through once more. News of the family reunion spread quietly at first, like whispers carried on the California breeze. But soon it reached neighbors, old friends, and even acquaintances who had long known fragments of our story. The raw honesty and courage I had shown in confronting my family resonated deeply with many, and I found myself suddenly at the center of a growing wave of support. Calls began arriving, some from people I hadn't heard from in years, others from strangers who had experienced similar family struggles. Their voices carried empathy and encouragement, reminding me that I was not alone in this painful journey. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, shared her own story of estrangement and reconciliation, offering advice and a listening ear. Another, a local journalist named Maria, expressed interest in sharing my story more broadly, believing it could shed light on the often hidden pain behind fractured families. First, I hesitated. Exposing such intimate details to the public felt daunting. But Maria's gentle persistence and sincere belief in the importance of the story convinced me that sharing might be a step toward healing. Not just for me, but for others facing similar battles. Together, we crafted an article that painted a vivid picture of my experience. The years of sacrifice, the heartbreak of rejection, the painful discoveries of betrayal, and ultimately, the courageous confrontation that began to mend broken ties. The piece was honest and unflinching, capturing the complexities of family dynamics without assigning blame, but rather highlighting the need for communication, understanding, and forgiveness. When the article was published in our local newspaper, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in, filled with stories of empathy, solidarity, and gratitude. Many shared their own experiences of family estrangement and expressed hope that my journey might inspire others to seek reconciliation. The community's outpouring of support was a balm to my wounded spirit. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not just as a mother fighting to reclaim her family, but as a person whose story mattered beyond the walls of my home. This public recognition also led to renewed conversations within my family. Some of my children reached out privately, their messages tentative but hopeful, expressing gratitude for my openness and a desire to work toward rebuilding trust. It was clear that the article had softened some of the barriers between us, opening doors that had long been closed. Neighbors who once greeted me with polite distance now stopped to share kind words and offer help. Old friends invited me for coffee, eager to reconnect and support me in this new chapter. The ripple effect of the story extended further than I could have imagined, weaving threads of connection and compassion through the fabric of my community. Yet, amid this newfound support, I remained mindful that healing was a delicate process. Forgiveness cannot be rushed, and rebuilding relationships requires time, patience, and effort from all involved. I continued to reach out to my family, inviting open dialogue and expressing my willingness to listen and understand. One afternoon, I attended a community gathering where Maria spoke about the importance of storytelling in healing personal and collective wounds. Hearing others share their journeys reinforced my belief in the power of vulnerability and truth. Inspired, I began organizing informal meetings for families dealing with estrangement, creating a safe space for sharing and support. These gatherings became a source of strength for many, including myself, as we navigated the challenging path toward reconciliation. As weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle but meaningful changes in my family's demeanor. Phone calls became more frequent, messages more heartfelt. We began to rebuild what had been broken brick by brick, conversation by conversation. In quiet moments, I reflected on the journey from isolation to connection, the transformation sparked by the courage to speak my truth, and the willingness of others to listen. I understood now that sometimes, healing begins not just within the family, but within the community that surrounds it. The public sharing of my story had not only brought support but also accountability. It challenged the misunderstandings and false narratives that had fueled the estrangement, allowing space for empathy and reconciliation to grow. Though the scars remained softened by time and love, I felt a renewed sense of belonging. My truth was no longer a secret burden, but a beacon lighting the way toward forgiveness and hope. And with each step forward, I carried the lessons learned, that family is complicated, love is imperfect, and healing is a journey best traveled together. The first time the phone rang with my daughter's voice on the other end, my heart nearly stopped. It was tentative, almost hesitant, as if she was testing the waters of a sea she had long avoided. "Mom," she began softly, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. I want to say I'm sorry." Those simple words carried the weight of years, of misunderstandings, hurt, and silence. I held the receiver close, tears blurring my vision as I replied, "I'm sorry too, sweetheart. I want us to heal, to find our way back." That call marked the beginning of a slow, fragile dance toward reconciliation. Over the weeks that followed, conversations grew longer and more open. My children shared their pain, their fears, and their hopes. I listened, sometimes with a heavy heart, but always with love and understanding. I shared my own regrets and the sacrifices I had made, hoping to bridge the chasms that had formed between us. Visits were tentative at first. A coffee shared in a quiet cafe, a lunch at my modest home, moments filled with both joy and awkward silences. But each meeting was a brick laid in the foundation of renewed trust. I was learning that mending broken bonds required patience and grace, a willingness to embrace imperfection and vulnerability. The grandchildren, who had been distant figures in this painful chapter, began to fill my home with laughter again. Their innocent questions and warm hugs reminded me of the unspoken love that had never truly faded, even in the darkest times. I cherished these moments, knowing they were precious steps toward rebuilding our family. There were setbacks, of course. Old wounds sometimes reopened, and misunderstandings flared. But with each challenge we grew stronger, more committed to healing. I found myself forgiving not only my children but also myself, for mistakes made in love and fear. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, sharing stories and laughter, I looked around at the faces I had fought so hard to keep close. The journey had been painful, but here we were, together, imperfect and healing. I realized that family is not defined by perfection or absence of conflict, but by the resilience of love and the courage to forgive. Our story was still being written, each day a new opportunity to choose connection over division. In the quiet moments before sleep, I felt a profound sense of peace. The truth I had fought to share was finally embraced, and with it came healing. Not just for me but for all of us. We had reclaimed our family, not as it once was but as it could be. A tapestry woven with threads of love, pain, forgiveness, and hope. And in that healing I found a renewed sense of purpose and belonging, grateful that despite the storms we had weathered, we were on the path toward a future built on understanding and acceptance. Sitting by the window of my modest California home, I found myself reflecting on the long journey that had brought me here. The path from abandonment and silence to reconciliation and hope. The sun cast a warm glow over the familiar streets, and a gentle breeze carried the faint sounds of life beyond my walls. It was a quiet moment, but inside my heart was full. I thought back to the day the phone call shattered my world, the day I learned my family had turned away from me. The pain of that rejection had been sharp and raw, a wound that seemed impossible to heal. Yet, from that moment of despair, a seed of determination took root within me. I had refused to let silence be the final chapter of our story. The years that followed were filled with struggle and self-discovery. I had sifted through memories and mementos, uncovering hidden truths and tangled emotions I had never fully understood. I confronted my family with honesty and courage, laying bare the complexities of our shared past. That confrontation, though painful, was the turning point. The moment when fractured bonds began to mend. The community's response had been a balm to my wounded spirit. Sharing my story publicly had brought support and solidarity, reminding me that I was not alone in this journey. It had opened doors not only within my family, but also in the wider world, connecting me with others who understood the pain and hope of rebuilding broken relationships. Most importantly, my family had begun to reach out, cautiously but sincerely, seeking forgiveness and offering their own. We navigated the delicate process of healing together, learning to listen and to love anew. The laughter of grandchildren once again filled my home, a testament to the resilience of love, even after years of silence. As I looked back, I realized the strength I had found within myself, the courage to face painful truths, the grace to forgive, and the hope to believe in the possibility of renewal. I had become more than the mother who had sacrificed everything. I was a woman who had reclaimed her voice and her dignity. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the scars of the past remained. But I embraced the imperfect beauty of our family's rebirth, knowing that love, when nurtured with honesty and patience, could heal even the deepest wounds. In this quiet moment, I felt a profound gratitude for the strength to endure, for the love that endured despite everything, and for the future we were building together. Our story was not one of perfect endings, but of resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of family. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the world, I embraced the promise of tomorrow, hopeful, healed, and ready to continue writing the chapters yet to come.